And excellent. We are live. Here we are, Zerilath Eternal on the Zerilath Immortal channel with Mario Garza. And I've got my familiar Locke with me today for as long as he decides to be a good boy. Anyway, all right. So this has been in the works for oh man, I've been thinking about having Mario on for honestly a couple of years since we met on the Weave, but I had been working up to things and we hadn't built the rapport yet and didn't get to know each other so well yet. This was 2025 has been a good time for me to up my interview game at least the beginning of this year. As a guy who doesn't do a tremendous amount of interviews, and now I'm having fun with a little bit of that. Everybody knows I was just doing Slick Dissident and Robert Phoenix last week. And the second we go live, he decides he doesn't want to behave because now
I
now
see.
he's gonna scratch my face or something. Anyway, we are here because polar symbolism. Mario has been making a big thing out of the polar symbolism, and I've also been looking at um, polar symbolism from Northern mythology, particularly trying to decode the Norse, and as well as the wealth of knowledge that has come from me being an amateur box saga studier who just jumped back into the series after taking a little break, and then I found more material for it. So I want to let Mario talk about the polar symbolism work that he has been doing. And then as we go along in the conversation, I'll not only have questions, but I'll have some addendums of things that I've been learning thus far, and as well as referencing some really cool stuff that I was showing Mario. And we may talk a little bit about the new pyramid discovery too, just because the pyramids I know is also part of polar symbolism.
hmm
So, Mario of Symbolic Studies, how are you doing, my friends? Say hello to my universe.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me, dude. Yeah, I mean, we've been aware of each other's work for a bit. There, that's hilarious, man. I'm appreciating what I'm seeing over there with you and your friend. Um, and yeah, the polar symbolism thing is a huge research rabbit hole that I've been in for a number of years now. And if people are unfamiliar with my work, my project is called Symbolic Studies. They can go to symbolicstudies.com to find, all of my links and everything else. And I started Symbolic Studies because I wanted to present information that I was learning surrounding the zodiac. And I thought that the zodiac, astrology, learning the signs and things like that would be a good foundation as a symbologist. I figured if I were going to take my symbolic studies seriously, I would need to really know what I'm talking about with astrology. So I really dove into that for a while, started producing content around that. And just over the years, I came across what some people have referred to as polar symbolism, northern symbolism. It's very much tied into what some authors have referred to as the primordial tradition. Something I refer to and others have referred to as axial symbolism really comes into play with it. And once I really started wrapping my head around these things and these themes, it really opened a whole new sort of weave for me with symbolism. And I realized that there was this great shift from polar symbolism to solar symbolism. And so there's a number of symbols that you'll look into today, and a lot of authors will attribute that to a solar sort of resonance or like a solar sort of foundation. And what I found is that that's actually not true for a lot of these symbols, and also deities too. There's a number of deities that people say are wholly solar in nature, but in actuality, they were polar way back in the day. So there's a number of threads to sort of pull at with this. It's a whole entire paradigm shift as far as I'm concerned. So kind of whatever angle you want to tackle things at, I'm happy sort of to go in that direction.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So, you know, the most, when we're talking about polars, we're talking about, the whole issue with poles and whatnot, right? So a lot of the polar symbolism is coming from things like in the Norse we have Yggdrasil, the world tree, and the trunk of that tree is the pole of the universe. And the ancient Egyptians have the Jed pillar as a
Hmm.
pretty sacred artifact, and there's as well as obelisks naturally, and um, and so all of these things are kind of some of the biggest deals, right? And then of course, with Egypt, Egypt kind of like it makes the look of things like the polar symbolism with what a pyramid is, with fire in the middle as such, and all the poles we now know that exist underneath it. But that's not so much on point just yet, and we have the matter of the evidences in the way we've recorded our mythology of the axial tilt
Hmm.
being a big part of not just why we shifted from polar to solar, but before we shifted to solar, seeing things in mythologies kind of either correspond or the way we see them now versus the way we've covered them, the way our ancestors covered them, the confusion kind of sets in of understanding why a mythos says that a particular thing is central, that has mythology in the sky, and so on and so forth. Because for me, the polar symbolism is also about this whole matter, in which I sent you this podcast with a gentleman who was doing the thing, who he kind of just basically figured out as well as just affirmed stuff that I had been intuiting and talking about on my channel about the northern constellations in the sky, and that aspect of the sky clock, which is more than just our zodiac, where we're seeing the story coming out of what we're all uniformly call Orion, and what we're all uniformly calling Leo and Ursa Major. Whatever, you're finding out that there's all these other stories that are correspondent in Norse mythos to these things, including a number of things that I hadn't uh, thought of. And I know a long, long time ago I put you on to oh, Scott Carlson and Billy Joe Carlson's Exposing Abraham book,
Hmm.
which had the breakdown of the northern sky, which had some of the stuff that the gentleman that was on the Nordic mythology podcast um, had pointed out. So the confirmations were really great on top of that. So yeah, so talk a little bit about the details in the symbolism that you discovered and how you brought those correspondences together.
Yeah, sure. So it's really interesting. For a number of years, I was really intrigued with occult history, as a lot of people sort of maybe in this space are. And I wanted to know the lay of the land with what different esoterically minded people thought, sort of just like what the different schools of thought were with everything. And I became interested in sort of the Lovecraftian black magical side of things. And so, for people who aren't aware, there's a whole entire side of modern occultism where people really are working with the Lovecraftian deities and things like that. And I was really fascinated with that. I wanted to know more about that. Like, what's really going on here? And so over the years, I read a number of books on that topic. And the conclusion I came to, as well as others, so these aren't my sort of like original revelations by any means, but people thought that Lovecraft was actually encoding an old sort of pantheon, but he updated it for modern sensibilities, right? And so, just like the Egyptians had their gods, the Greeks had their gods. Obviously, culturally, people around the world are going to have their different deities. It's almost like Lovecraft created like the modern pantheon, basically. But what he was encoding in his stories, there was a lot of northern symbolism. And there's actually a book called The Gates of the Necronomicon by Simon. And what you see on it actually are the seven stars of Ursa Major. And so he gets into the symbolism of Ursa Major in the northern sky and what that really represents. And so I thought that was a very curious thing. The more I dug into that, the more I realized that there are people in the occult world who did I break up for a second? Okay, I think I broke up for a second, but I'm here, right? You know what? Unfortunately, man, I can't hear you right now for some reason. So it's probably on my end. I
Oh,
don't know
oh
if you.
no. I'm sorry. I forgot to unpause because of how the. Okay, yeah. You had you said like people in the occult world, and then it froze, and then there was a latency thing for a second where you were talking fast, but you're okay now. So people in the occult world.
Yeah, so what I found was that there were people in the occult world who had an understanding of this polar tradition and of polar northern symbolism and of the esoteric importance of the northern sky, basically. And so learning about all of the different correspondences, as an example, with Ursa Major, right? It's known as a plow, it's known as a wagon, it was known as reindeer, even as a sleigh, and things like that.
Mm,
There's a lot of stuff going on in the northern sky, and I thought that that was really, really interesting, and I was getting a lot out of that. And so I wanted to find out, where did these authors, who were they reading, basically? Who were they influenced by? Who filled them in that this is a whole entire study? And the more I started digging into that, the more I found authors that were talking about all of this stuff very directly. And I'll just say, I talk about him all the time, but Rene Guénon is an excellent symbologist, and he's one of the most sort of straightforward authors that talks about this great switch from polar symbolism to solar symbolism, and basically all of the implications with that. So the way I describe it personally is sort of my metaphysics is that everything emits from a center and then also returns back to that same center. So there is sort of a principle unity, basically, that everything is expressed from, but then also returns back to. This central point of pivot can be likened to a symbolic pole, basically, right? And so the idea is that there are realms above and below, in my opinion, and they're all connected through their center, right? So the world tree metaphor really is an appropriate symbol to kind of convey this idea, right?
mm.
Different worlds that the world tree covers, but there is a central trunk, basically. These realms above and below have also been likened to wheels, right? And I think that's interesting because we have our chakras. Chakra means disc or wheel. We have seven chakras, right? Potentially more, but let's just say we have seven chakras.
Right.
They're all connected through your spine, basically. So your
Yeah.
spine is sort of the bridge between these chakras. And so, really, what all of this sort of amounts to is what people have referred to as the world axis. So, you mentioned the pole, in the center of the universe. That's the world axis. The world axis is also the universal axis. And the main idea for ancient peoples was that there is a central point of pivot, not unlike a pole, not unlike a tree, not unlike a tower or an obelisk or something along these lines, that extends through all that is above with all that is below. And in today's world, if you look up Axis Mundi or World Axis, that's what you're referring to. And this made a lot more sense to people who were geocentrically minded, where they considered the Earth to be at the center, of sort of this space, and that the stars revolve around Earth. Earth isn't necessarily spinning or moving in their world. It's the heavens that are moving around us, according to them. And so the
Right.
world axis is the point of pivot in the middle. And so there's a natural relationship with the North Pole. We call it a pole, it's an axis, right? And then also the pole star, the North Star. So the North Pole has a relationship with the pole star because there's this axis running through it. And so when you're talking about the wheel of heaven, that's what you're referring to. You're referring to all of the stars rotating around this one central star, which is the North Star Polaris. And of course, most people are going to say that Polaris shifts over time with the precession of the equinoxes. The more people I talk to, the more people I run into that do not think that the pole star actually shifts. So that's something that I'm kind of like debating myself, and I think that that's kind of up for a conversation, basically, whether the pole star actually shifts or not. But the pole star is the center in the wheel of heaven, and this star is considered to be sort of like motionless, basically, right? And so when you get into wheel symbolism, symbolically, the wheel is so interesting to me. The outside of the wheel is related to division, multiplicity. It's considered to be the most imbalanced part of the wheel because it's always moving around, pretty much. If you get to the interior of the wheel, we're all like our own wheel, basically, symbolically, I would say.
Mm.
If you are operating outside of self and you're always looking for external validation and things of that sort, you're operating on the outside of your wheel. When you get to the inside of the wheel, when you get to the interior or the axle of the wheel, you become what's referred to as the unmoved mover. It's sometimes been referred to as the prime mover, and you get to the motionless center. So when you get to the center of your wheel, you can see images of Buddha meditating in the middle of a wheel, basically, right? A
Mhm.
lot of Eastern symbols are kind of based around this wheel like sort of thing, like a mandala or what have you. When Buddha gained enlightenment at the world tree, I'm inclined to think that he basically, it's a metaphor for that he reached sort of that still point within, pretty much. But know thyself and you'll know the universe. When you access the interior part of self, when you get to your center or sacred center, this is how you commune with other realms, right? This is like what astral travel, in my opinion, really goes back to a lot of it. Getting to your center so that you can actually access that bridge to other domains, pretty much. And so when you get to that center, you are immutable, you are stationary, and the world can basically be, pure chaos all around you, but you are centered and you are still, and you cause the wheel to turn by being stationary. That there's a whole line of mythology that really gets into all of this stuff. So
Mm.
it really is kind of like this full spectrum sort of dynamic, polar northern symbolism, how it relates to the sky, how it relates to metaphysics and
Mhm.
spirituality, all this kind of stuff. So those are a few of sort of the key threads in a nutshell, I would say.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. There's two different lines of questions. So I'm gonna throw
Sure.
both out there, and you answer which one in which order is gonna serve the second question better. So my first question was because I actually didn't know that there was a lot of looking into the New World Lovecraft mythos as just specifically kind of like part of what got you to polar symbolism. So I'd be very fascinated to know your findings. And then the other thing is that when it comes to the idea of the axial tilt and the sidereal time, um, where where was that in the sky? Because everyone tells me the only lead that I ever get is that it was Alpha Draconis, the Eye of the Dragon, would which I think makes the most sense because then you've got the sky would look like a giant spirograph um, in slow motion if you had Alpha Draconis spiraling around and around, as opposed to our more well known swastika design that comes from Ursa Major and or Minor, operating across the four cardinal directions.
Gotcha. Right. Let's talk about the Lovecraftian stuff for a second, and then we could talk about the
Okay.
tilt and what pole shift actually means, right?
All right.
Um, yeah, so that was an interesting time in life when I started coming across all of that. And I would say that if people really want to know more about this specific thread, Peter Lavenda, I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work or not, but he's one of these guys that is sort of the clearest and most straightforward with some of this material. So he wrote a book called The Dark Lord. He gets into all of this. And then he also wrote a book called Stairway to Heaven, where he gets into this not through H.P. Lovecraft necessarily, but he really expands upon northern sky symbolism, northern sky mythology, and essentially what he pieces together is that a lot of cultures around the world had this idea that the stairway to heaven is in the northern sky, basically. That there is a symbolic bridge that takes you to other realms. And that's a big part of this conversation, actually, is this idea that I see it that we kind of live in a nested toroidal sort of structure. And so if you know what a torus field looks like, it's like a donut. Imagine another torus field outside of that, and then another one outside of that. Um, if you have this dynamic, if it's a nested toroidal sort of thing, they all share their same center, basically, just like concentric circles or concentric rings.
Mm.
If there's concentric rings, they all share the same center, basically, right? So it goes along with this idea of this center, once again, being the transcendental point of any system, whether it's yourself or whatever. Always look for the center, because that is the sort of point of pivot, but then it's also the point of, like, again, transcendence, I would say, personally. And so this idea of the northern sky or the northern portion of Earth has always been tied to this, pretty much. And so whether you go to the northern portion of Earth and you imagine that there is a world mountain, or you imagine that there's a big hole, because this gets into like hollow Earth sort of material and things like that. There's lots of different theories of what's going on at the north. There is a magnetic quality to the north, right? This is why all of our compasses point north. I've been saying this for a little while now, but to me, the compass itself is not only a physical tool in the real world, it's also a spiritual tool as well. It's telling you to follow the North Star, in my opinion. It's telling you to follow your true north, basically, right? It's an acknowledgement of the center of this plane or domain or whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
And right,
I was going to actually ask one little
yeah,
thing
go
for
ahead.
you to insert there, right? Because we talk about, for whatever it is, that there's the difference between true north, which is going to be the north of our axial tilt in the first place, versus magnetic north, which
Hmm.
everybody is complaining about its shift to Siberia,
Hmm.
right?
Right. There's actually, I think the last time I looked into it, there's like three or four acknowledgments of what North represents, if you're going to split hairs about it. So this really comes into play in the military, and where you actually need maps to be practical and functional, and you need the compasses to work, and how GPS works and everything else. I can't remember all of the different terms,
Mm.
but you're right. There is more than one idea of what North sort of represents, for sure. And then this shifting magnetic North thing, I think, is really really interesting, actually, for a few different reasons. Um, so the North, though, has always been this sort of mythical place. What I say is that it appears as though humanity originated in the North, and that there was a migration away from the North. This is what makes sense to me, even symbolically. And when that happened, I think that this is kind of what is being sort of alluded to with the fall of man. That when man was in a more northern sort of sector, they were closer to spirit. They were closer to all of the things that come with that. And so I think that they saw meaning in everything. They saw purpose in everything. They saw the divinity in everything, including themselves. As you moved away from this symbolic pole, from this symbolic center, this is when man became sort of lost. This is when man became more material. This is when man sort of descended, in a lot of different ways. And so what I've heard is that the difference between the last golden age, which again some authors refer to as the primordial tradition, the difference between the last golden age and the sort of current dark age that we find ourselves in is literally the acknowledgement of the center, right? So people had more of a focus with things that related to the center, both in the heavens and then also in their immediate sort of vicinity, and then also, therefore, too, with self, right? And so even people lived in like circular homes and like all sorts of different things like that. It really again, it completely changed the perspective of mankind, in my opinion, and it changed how we interpret symbolism and all sorts of different things. That's my sort of impression. So H.P. Lovecraft, when he's alluding to different constellations, people have said this is a clear sort of indication he's talking about Ursa Major, right? He also referred to himself as the keeper of the North Point. And I'll say that the book that gets into Lovecraftian Northern symbolism more than any other book is a book called Polaria, The Gift of the White Stone by this guy named W.H. Mueller. And some people actually thought that this book was written by Kenneth Grant. I'm not sure if you're familiar with who Kenneth Grant is, but he's a guy who came after Crowley. And some people like his work, other people don't. I think he's super interesting. I think that he puts a lot of interesting history out there. And he started melding Lovecraftian symbolism, Northern symbolism, and then kind of what Crowley had put out there with some of his occult works and things like that. So Kenneth Grant is sort of a key figure in all of this stuff. And so some people did not care for that. They thought that it was very odd or weird or strange. The thing I think is super interesting about it is that H.P. Lovecraft always talked about these ancient ones or these old ones, right? In my opinion, the oldest gods come from the northern sky. That the northern sky is home of the oldest, most primordial myths and gods. And so this is basically kind of like overlays his whole entire mythos, which, to be honest with you, I'm not even that big of a Lovecraftian sort of fan. I just wanted
Sure.
to know what the hell he was talking about
Yeah, yeah,
and what
yeah,
he was alluding to. And so
yeah. I mean,
these are sort of go ahead.
I was gonna say like the primary location of note in their mythos is Antarctica, because
Right.
Antarctica is real where the city of R'lyeh is, where Cthulhu's cult holds him waiting to wake from his slumber, etc., etc. And even though Cthulhu is not the biggest god in the pantheon, he is the biggest lord of evil for the earth in particular, and is the most involved in the human mind on an active basis as he invades our dreams to create our nightmares, so on and so forth. I see Cthulhu as a as kind of like Loki. I think Cthulhu is a lot like Loki, to be honest with you, because he's got like this level of dreaming that's involved with him that makes him kind of this dark side to Odin with Loki, and thus I would also then say that Odin would be Yog-Sothoth, because Yog-Sothoth is just like Odin, completely obsessed with knowledge, completely obsessed with wanting to know everything, and he gets his tentacles into everything to know everything, and is cognate to Odin, right? So it could be that Lovecraft is the northern symbolism, and the reason why it's in Antarctica is because it's the northern symbolism that is the inversion. It is the anti-North.
There you go. Yeah, yeah,
Anti-North
exactly.
versus the Antichrist. Lovecraft was a fucking genius.
You know what's interesting too about that? There's always the more I study symbolism, the more I can appreciate the fact that um, when you study the yang, you will find the yin. When you study the yin, you will find the yang. Like you will find yin within the yang, and vice versa. So if there is something relating to the south or the north, it could be actually inferring the exact opposite. Every proposition contains its opposite. That's another way of putting it, basically. And so that's what actually like the tarot and different divination systems and mythology a lot of times will sort of encode the opposite meaning of what you would expect.
Mm,
But it's still locked into sort of that paradigm or that axis or that pole or that
yes,
spectrum or whatever you want to say.
yes, yes.
Um,
Um,
you
oh,
know,
oh,
and go for it.
Oh yes, I wanted to throw one more important caveat because it's related to the Lovecraftian demons and all of this stuff specifically with the axial tilt. Is that there's a very famous depiction of the demiurge that people know, where he's standing on a ball and he's bound up with coils around him. He's got his lion head, and then he's got a staff, and his staff is at an angle while he stands straight upon the ball, and it is the same 23.4-degree tilt of of our axis now, thus implying that the demiurge, Yaldabaoth, is responsible for holding the Earth in the inversion.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's really interesting. Um, and there's something to be said about that, absolutely, because the demiurge closely relates to the sun. And so there's a whole correspondence between the demiurge and Leo is the only sign ruled by the sun.
Mm.
And a lot of people place the demiurge in the time of Leo, that there's this natural sort of relationship. And the reason why this makes sense as well is because we have Cancer, then Leo, and then you have Virgo. Virgo is the virgin. She's the queen of heaven and also the queen of earth. And she's basically in the Gnostic creation story, she's Sophia. So virgin basically means unwed, unmarried. It didn't mean traditionally not having had physical sex, basically. And so if we're talking about the Queen of Heaven, Sophia, she is unwed and unmarried because she had no equal. Because she was the first sort of essence or deity to exist, and it was deep, deep, deep within her she created the demiurge, or she discovered or birthed the demiurge somehow on her own accord, kind of like having a virgin birth, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you actually see this relationship in the strength card. You see the traditional strength card, like the Rider Waite version of the strength card. This card is actually showing you the relationship between Virgo and Leo, the Virgin and the Lion, or the Virgin or
Mhm.
Sophia and the Demiurge, basically. So
Yeah.
to your point, yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot
It's
going on there
yeah.
because I'll say that this shift, this potential axial tilt or this pole shift, one of the biggest things that comes with it is the worship of the sun, in my opinion. So
Mm.
if the demiurge relates to the sun, what you just mentioned there about the demiurge kind of keeping this sort of dynamic in play is absolutely true, because when people shifted away from a northern correspondence of things, they shifted right towards the sun.
Mm.
And to me, I think that solar worship threw a lot of things off. Personally, I think that we are living in a very solar age, pretty much, right?
Mm.
And so this seems to be the predominant sort of symbolic paradigm I think that we live in. That's
Indeed.
how I see it personally.
Yeah, yeah. Like, I want to take the moment here. Like, last time we spoke, so I don't know if you took a peek at it or have been paying attention to what I've been doing on my channel with the Bach saga. So, have you made yourself a little bit more familiar with it since last we chit chatted?
Here and there, people like to bring it up. I
Okay.
consider myself personally an ally of the Bach Saga people,
Yeah.
but some people don't consider me the same way.
Oh.
And we'll get into it. But yeah, what have you been looking into as of late with it?
All right. Well, the Bach saga is all polar in its
Sure.
absolute essence. So to give you the absolute brief, is a man passed away. I believe in the early 2000s was when he passed away. Named Eeyore Bach, and
Hmm.
it's the story that his family has held for millions of years. His family has been telling this oral tradition as a keeper of the story of mankind, going back to the absolute beginning in the kingdom of Udenma, it is called, in Finland, where when we were in the paradise time, when we were in the sidereal and there was only one season and such, um, Helsinki, Finland was effectively the North Pole, right? And
Right.
this is hell, as in Helheim. That is what the hell in Helsinki is for. And there was a great hole that goes through the earth that corresponds to the whole of our Taurus field, and there was I guess this was like there was a great tree, an Yggdrasil tree, that was correspondent near this hole, or over this hole, perhaps. It's a little bit unclear, as I've been trying to listen to the story several times and figure it out. But that would reach all the way up to Alpha Draconis as the true north in and of itself, and then all of civilization started up there. Your thing about all the oldest gods, same thing. You had Udin, which was this golden ring, and the sun was kind of part of Udin, the golden ring that then made up also this northern region, which was specifically that starting point. And then there were several things. It gets into the hexagram because it's ultimately in a hexagram shape, the ring, um, and um, and Udin uh, allowed Earth to go through a kind of evolutionary process for a while until it changed the energy field of the world to allow an evolutionary leap where the way mankind started was is that a nanny goat and a particular kind of monkey were hybridized to make a chimera, and then there was a brother and sister that were made this way, and in the Bach saga they were Frey and Freyr, and they were these goat monkey deities, and they were the first deities because Udin is kind of this consciousness of the gold ring of the world that is kind of more than it's like the all. It's like the creator, and then you've got gods, and the first gods were understood originally from this Frey and Freyr, and then the energy of the universe was such where incest did not cause mutation, and the first royal family was seeded, who then seeded the rest of the world and created a whole hierarchy of order of the three caste system of the Jarl, the Carl, and the Thrall. And there was a whole then there was the fertility cult aspect of the story, explaining how they kept genetic purity by running seminal fluid upline the family as well as vaginal fluid upline the family to preserve this integrity. And there's a whole thing about soul strength. They talk about life and death. There's a centrifugal force in the ethers, and when you die, when your ashes absorb your essence into the leaves of a tree, then the sun takes your essence and it goes into the centrifugal force. And it's the well of souls concept, right? You know, where the souls are all in a circling, and that's the energy at the North Pole. So the North Pole area is also the well of souls where we all
Hmm.
go to get on the wheel of Sansara to come back, right? And so that's the system. And so this axial tilting force of the possibly the sun is Udin. Udin is also the one who created the first cataclysm. Udin himself wanted to destroy the way the world was and created a Ragnarok. And this was the Ice Age. And that Ice Age is what separated the Hyperborean royal family from the rest of the Earth. And that is why you've got this fragmented likeness of a monomyth that we get from everywhere because so much time has passed, cut off from our original family, who many of which went on ego trips to become basically the Illuminati.
Hmm. Hmm. Right, right. Yeah. No, great summary there. And I knew a lot of that stuff, and you sprinkled in some new things I hadn't heard of
Oh,
before.
there's so
I
much.
know there's like it's a whole thing. Yeah.
You are going to level up so hard when you embrace the box saga, my friend. So hard. You're going to love it. You're going to flip.
You know, I tried to read. I think his name is Carl Borgenson or Borgerson or something. His book
Yeah,
on it.
yeah, yeah.
I personally I didn't care for it too much. Not the information, but his writing style. I
Okay.
thought it was kind of lacking personally, and I think he was repeating a lot of information. But I have watched all of the sort of longer form documentaries on
Mm,
it. Whatever's available on YouTube, I'm
yeah.
pretty sure I've seen most of the good ones.
Yeah,
Um,
if you can sit down and listen to either Eeyore Bach himself giving his
mhm.
early dissertations from the 80s until he died, in the ones he does in English, which are hard because his English is a second language. But Jim Chesner, who passed away, oh man, I would love to have interviewed him. He was still alive when I was doing shows, but he was very old. He was American, and so he was one of his best English speaking students, and he made the Bach saga very clear for English. And by the way, English is the third root race. So the Bach saga can be told in English rationally and logically because it's going to get into puns because
Right. Oh yeah.
all the language that we use today all runs into this 27 letter alphabet that was originally conceived by the first king and queen, who are called Ra and Maya, by the way. So the first king of the world, his title was Ra. The first queen of the world, her title was Maya.
Mm,
Very,
right. Yeah.
it's you're gonna get all that.
That's
There
loaded.
was a the king's name was Per, and we're all sons of Per. We're all Persons. It's a whole thing. But let's stick with our subject for today because
Yeah.
if you got more to say on the Lovecraftian angle, I'd love to hear it. And let's not forget my other question about the poll.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, real quick on the Bach saga. So, this is just my understanding of things, and this is why what I have absorbed and what I have talked about on other podcasts with Bach saga people, and what they've brought to my table. There is like a complete like synergy with what I'm saying and with what they're saying. The difference, I would say, between what they're saying and what I'm saying is that my opinion is that it seems as though this northern myth, and even like a northern king, like that's the blueprint for all kings. Whether you're talking about kings in China, kings in Europe, they're all basically emulating this idea of a northern polar king, right? And so the thing that I sort of take away from all of this is that, and this is something that I picked up from Rene Guénon, but the idea is that if the North was the true center and it was the transcendental point and it was the bridge that spanned the gap between everything that is above and below, right? And when people migrated away from that and they started setting up new sort of spiritual centers, you know, founding new cities and villages and empires and things like that, they basically emulated the original primary site
Hmm.
that humanity came from. So that sort of idea in the North, again, is like the blueprint for everything else that you see around the world. So
Yes.
people took that with them. And so now, as an example, when we talk about Mecca, right? They created a spiritual pole in Mecca. So where the Kaaba cube is, that is their north. This is why they pray to Mecca 5 times a day. No matter where you're at in the world, you're supposed to face Mecca. You pray towards the Kaaba cube. What
Hmm.
do you do when you get there? You know, you go and you have to circle around it 7 times, right?
Hmm.
The number 7 is supremely important in all of this stuff.
Hmm.
And so when you really decode it, they go counterclockwise, by the way. I don't know if we've ever talked about this,
Hmm.
but they go counterclockwise, and all of the fixed stars go counterclockwise around the pole star. This is really interesting as well, as it kind of relates to some of the H.P. Lovecraft stuff. To go counterclockwise and you have that totem on your left hand side, that's
Hmm.
very, very feminine. And it
Hmm.
kind of reminds me of the left hand path a little bit. That I'm kind of inclined to think that there are aspects of the left hand path that are completely polar in nature, basically. That it's not really the duality between solar and lunar, it's actually solar and polar. Like when you do more digging, you'll realize that
Yeah.
that's kind of like sort of the pole or the axis or the spectrum that we're kind of dealing with here, right? The masculine projective sun, symbolically, for the most part. I know there's cultures that have it flipped. And then sort of there's a major feminine correspondence with the pole as well. There's a masculine correspondence
Yeah.
there for sure. So it
This is
really is kind of a
yeah.
middle path sort of thing, I think. But you can basically, you know, whether you want to talk about the goddess or the god as it relates to the North, there's
Yeah.
plenty to sort of chew on and talk about with that, right?
Yeah, yeah. You see, it makes sense because you see, as the universal proper manner in magic of drawing the circle of the magician, when your magical intention is to do, you draw your circle clockwise. When it is your magical intention to undo, you draw it anti-clockwise. When I do
Mm-hmm.
magic, I open my magic circle, I draw it clockwise. And then when I am done with my ritual, I I undo the circle to discharge the energy in the circled area, because the area itself is not as important as what I did in it, and I go anti-clockwise to close the ritual.
There you go. Yeah,
Yeah.
the way I perceive it, and it's definitely related to what you're saying. The clockwise rotation is actually more solar, and it's more expansive. It's more projective, which I think is more masculine and related to action, as you're saying. The counterclockwise rotation is more polar, and it actually is more contractive. It actually draws you towards the center, basically, right? And so that is the dynamic with these circumambulation rituals, where you go counterclockwise, like in Mecca. So this would be considered what Guanan and others have said as a secondary site, and that there's a principal site, and the principal site is in the actual north itself. So to me, in my opinion, all cultures sort of have this baked into it. And they're going to have variations on the theme, in my opinion, but you're going to find that a lot of them have a lot of overlapping symbolism. And
Okay, hang on a second, Mari. You froze. If you can hear me, you froze. Hang on a tick. Give us a second, folks. It's frozen for me anyway.
I'm
Okay.
back.
Okay. Oh, yep, yep. You're back. You're back. You were frozen for about 10 seconds.
Okay, I gotcha. So what I was just going to say is with the Bach saga, I see this as perhaps a secondary story, and that this story is actually more universal than what people may realize, and that they had their own flavor of northern symbolism and how they conveyed all this information. And I personally, I'm grateful that we have the Bach saga story coming around and people talking about it, because in my opinion, this is just another example of like a primordial tradition
Oh yeah.
that people have kept intact, orally, basically. And so it's like a gift that we have this available to us, right?
Absolutely. Even with this new Giza Pillars discovery, I was listening to Styx Hexenhammer covering it, and it was reminding him of the intrigue of Lemminkainen Temple with how it was. So he brought up the Box Saga. He's brought it up before. He doesn't bring it up too often, but the fact that he would evoke the Box Saga over this, I'm grateful that he did that, because we're hitting a new level. Like we're absolutely beginning to see the concrete proof of a much different epic past of our people. The whole human race, that is, not just whites.
I'll be completely honest with you. There's something kind of hoaxy about this pyramid story. And
Okay.
so I'm not taking it at face value the way a lot of other people are taking it.
Mm,
I can't say I've done a lot of research on it, but when I see things spread like wildfire like this now,
mm.
and I see that now out, very quickly, Alex Jones had the guy who kind of popularized the story on in like no time flat, and people are now sending all these images around and everything else. I understand why Egypt is like a fascination with people,
Mm.
but to me, there seems that there is something more sort of going on. I wonder if it's, I don't know, is it a
I
distraction? What's happening here? I personally, though, I'm not as excited as other people are about it, just because I'm super skeptical with these types of things.
Sure. Well, I think that it's the discrepancy between raw data and the interpretation of the data is the thing that screws people up, right? Because you have the raw data, and somebody wants to, somebody wants to publish their paper on the data that they found. They're going to work with their limited whatever. They may want to publish something they believe is going to pass the mustard, right? So they don't want to go into some sort of crazy theories. I would say that what sounds most sus to me is how many kilometers down they say it goes. I doubt that it actually goes that far down. Otherwise, um, a basic thing one can say just looking at that is that, well, perhaps that was like an earthquake proofing foundation that they had the forethought to build for this very permanent type of structure. And also, Ken Wheeler had a theory that he feels was affirmed by this discovery himself, that he explained very well in his video about what he says the pyramids are after that finding came out. So this is like a new commentary that he made that I would recommend checking that out because he's just explaining for what he's the science of what the machine that we call the Giza pyramid does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. But no. Of course, there does need to be skepticism, as always. But I feel pretty strongly that there is something of significance there that's big, and um, at the end of the day, the point is that there's something that was built underneath the pyramid, right? Meaning, like, was the pyramid first and then they dug underneath it? I doubt it. Meaning that there was something to how we built it. There's a tell to how we built it that needs to be discovered through this.
Right, right. Well, I mean, with anything that really truly ascends like that, whether it's a building or a tower, a castle, or a pyramid, as above, so below, chances are it's pretty right? The tree sent to the heavens, it's going to have deep roots. And so, absolutely, having something underneath the pyramid is not surprising to me at all. And I've never been. That's the other thing I'll just say. I've never been. I would love to go to Egypt and
Yeah.
explore and check out these things for myself. So, I feel like for me, like I have to have limited commentary on it just because I'm not aware of all the happenings with it. But as it relates to Northern symbolism, what people don't often bring up is the fact that pyramids are symbolic mountains. And to me, if we're talking about a symbolic mountain, we're talking about Mount Meru, or we're talking about the Polar Mountain, we're talking about the
Yeah.
World Mountain,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I would say it's a symbolic volcanic mountain because fire
Mm,
in the middle.
there you go. No, I agree with you. What's interesting about that? Right now, we're in Aries season, right? This is the season of the ram. And right there in the middle of pyramid, you have ram, pyramid. What
Mm.
do rams do? Rams ascend, rams climb.
Yeah.
They're one of the more tricky, expensive animals to hunt because they go to such high elevations. And so it really is like a rich man's sort of game. Normal common folk aren't necessarily ram hunting. That's my understanding, right? There's other animals for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the premier sort of skull that you want, or head that you want taxidermied is a ram's head, basically, right? And those horns,
Yeah.
everything about the ram is headstrong. So it's the
Yeah.
first sign of the zodiac. It literally corresponds with the head.
Yep.
It leads the way, it leads the zodiac. The head leads the way, the feet trail behind, sort of symbolically.
Yep.
And so the ram ascends. And I find this really interesting too, is the fact that in some tarot decks, I'm thinking of the Rider Waite tarot deck in this instance, but the card that corresponds with Aries is the Emperor.
Right.
And so it's the fourth card of the major arcana.
Mm.
And the Emperor is sitting on a throne. Often it's like a stone throne. And he has two mountains beside him, right? And the way he looks very triangular. And this is because he is the central mountain, right? I said earlier that the sort of blueprint for the king is a northern polar king. That's what the emperor represents. The reason why he corresponds with the number 4 is because my understanding is that ancient kings had this idea that they wanted to rule from the center, kind of like the pole star. Basically, the pole star is like emblematic of this idea.
Hmm.
And from this center, from the center of their land, there's a whole science called centrography. And people used to want to know the center of their region, the center of their land, the center of their island, something along these lines. And in the center of their land, they oftentimes would put a central stone, a central temple, a standing stone. Sometimes they might have a world tree sort of dynamic in the middle of their land. And this is where people would congregate, right? So, since it was in the middle of the region, everyone from all different parts of the land can come together. And this is actually where they would have rituals and festivities. A lot of these locations actually turned into marketplaces, And so it's not uncommon in Europe to have these market crosses. I think it's interesting that it's mark it, as in
Yeah.
like market in the middle, market in the center. And so the
Yeah.
kings had this idea that they would rule from this central point, which they were aware of,
Yeah.
and from there, four lines emanate: north, south, east, and west. Basically, a
Yep.
cross emanates,
Yeah. And the
and so the
Marquette,
land would be quartered.
I was gonna say the Marquette is the tech ram.
Ah, there you go. Nice. Yeah, yeah. And so they would quarter the land, and so you would have north, south, east, and west. And this is why kings have always been associated with crosses. So if you imagine you're at the North Pole, if there is a Mount Meru, if there is a central mountain, this fits into the idea that there are four rivers that emanate from this central mountain. Like there's a Mercator map. It's a really famous map that shows this whole entire dynamic.
Mm.
Or there's always this idea of four winds emanating from the north or converging at the north. But basically, the idea of ruling from the center, there's a great cross that emanates from that. So once again, the Emperor, fourth card of the Major Arcana, Jupiter, the king of planets. Its glyph looks like a number four.
Mm.
Christ was crucified on the cross. I did a presentation last year, or maybe it was the year before, called Kingdoms, Kings, and Crosses.
Yeah.
And I really get into this idea of the cross always being related to the king, and there being this quartering of the land dynamic and how important
Yeah.
that was,
Yeah.
way back in the day.
And if you take Earth out of the celestial orbits, Jupiter is the fourth planet from the sun, who would be the Fool card.
There you go, man. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's really interesting. So there's a ton of correspondences with that. The King of the World by Rene Guénon gets into a lot of this stuff. The polar dynamic of everything, of the polar king being the original king. And so now all kings since then are basically emulating that same dynamic pretty much. And so even like China used to be called the Middle Kingdom.
Mm.
And I've seen some graphs where the king's quarters were like in the middle of the land, and that there were different sort of sectors all around him, but they wanted to rule from the center. And it's kind of like this idea that if they are in the middle of the cross of the kingdom, that center, that sacred center, is the point of transcendence. And so kings used to have this idea that they were unifiers, unifying the quadrants. So it's almost like each quadrant symbolically could be a different element, the four elements, and then you are like the fifth element. You're the element that binds all of the other elements together. And then they also had this idea, though, that by being in the middle, they unite heaven and earth. And so this is sometimes referred to as the Great Triad, that they united heaven and earth together, and that they are sort of that binding sort of force. And that's kind
Yeah.
of lost in today's world because we don't view leaders
Right.
like that, and they're not like that.
Right, right, yeah. Thor, who is very largely a Jupiter, like a Zeusian type of character in reality. His father is Odin, which we could easily box saga that into Udin. It's all it would be cognate with like Ukko, and Ukko is also like a Thor type, and so that's the sky god, and then in the box saga, Earth is called Ma, right? The Jotun Jord, who is Mother Earth, is Thor's mother, and so Thor is this embodiment of this unification, and he has a relationship with the force of gravity, and then the relationship of centrifugal force, the way he throws his hammer, and thus, and as well as like the ethers with the lightning and the thunder.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right, right. Totally. Kind of lines up too. I mean, I just think of rams butting heads as well.
Hmm.
And just like the thunderous crack, when they're going at it like that,
Yeah,
reminds me a little
yeah,
bit of some of that symbolism.
yeah. And rams greet each other by as males by kicking each other in the nuts. I find that one of
Yeah, that's what
my
I've heard.
favorite things about rams is that they kick each other in the nuts to say hi. It's just like I try to be the kindest of Arieses, but I've got to forcefulness that is a little bit in there, which is kind of associated with my love for another person, where I'm very like, right? I'm very just like excited to like bestow my energy with you, right? And it comes off aggressive, and I'm just like, what? And it's as if I kicked somebody in the nuts. It's like, geez, you act like I insulted your mother. I'm just excited.
That's hilarious, dude. I didn't know you were an Aries. Maybe I've heard that before, but that's great. When's your birthday?
My God, I only brag about my Ariesness like an Aries with my Leo on the midheaven, but I'm on the 6th.
Okay, right on, man. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. So it's popping up. Happy birthday to me and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, it's a really, really interesting sign. And it makes so much sense that it would be the first sign of the zodiac, right? I know we're not here to talk about just,
Right.
Aries symbolism or
Right.
whatever,
Right.
but it really, to me, part of what it represents, how it kind of corresponds with polar mythology and everything. Which, by the way, before I get into that real quick, I'll just say my personal opinion is that I've read this from several authors at this point, and I'm fairly convinced. I'm about to do a presentation on this on YouTube to just kind of get a lot of these ideas off my chest, and I'm calling it on the origin of the zodiac. And there are different authors who have put forth that basically, back in the day when people were more polar, they were really looking at the northern sky, and that was their sky clock. The sky clock was basically Ursa Major and Minor going counterclockwise around the pole star,
Hmm.
and it goes around once a year. And so you already know this, right? But just to repeat it, people think this is where we get the swastika from. I'm pretty convinced of that, right? Once a season, you're
Yeah.
looking at Ursa Major going around the pole
Yep.
star.
Yep.
And some people have referred to this as a seven stationed zodiac, by the way. Some people have said that in the primordial world, the world tree had seven branches, and in the solar modern world, it has 12 branches. So it went from 7 to 12 branches. Um, and so I think this is interesting, but one author, his name is John Major Jenkins, he basically said that according to his research, the ancient Chinese people, when they were polar, that they had 8 constellations around the pole star, and these 8 constellations had a correspondence with the 8 trigrams of the I Ching, and that the I Ching became a thing during this time. And when they became more solar over time, they transferred the 8 constellations from the north. There you go. Yeah. They transferred these 8 constellations to the ecliptic, which is the path of the sun. And then they added 4 more constellations. So he's saying that the origin of the Chinese zodiac comes from the north. I'm pretty convinced that that's actually the story, when you rewind time, is that the mythology of all the signs go back to the northern sky. And I'm actually inclined to think this is me really kind of putting myself out there now. I'm starting to think that perhaps all of the mythology of all of the constellations literally come from the northern sky, because there's been so many examples that I've tracked with this.
Mm.
One such example would be the Pleiades. I did a presentation called The Pleiadians, and I talk about how the mythology associated with the Pleiades actually comes from Ursa Major. Ursa Major was the original 7 stars of enlightenment during polar times. When
Mm.
people became solar, they transferred the symbolism of Ursa Major to the Pleiades. And so when people put a lot of stock into the Pleiades in today's world, a lot of New Agers do this, by the way. A lot of cultures do this. So it's not just like, I'm not just pointing fingers at just a couple people. But when people put so much stock into the Pleiades, they don't realize that there is this great transference from Ursa Major. And Rene Guénon actually wrote an amazing article about this. He called it the bear, the great boar and the bear. And he talks about this whole entire transference. And it's super interesting. The reason why it's called the great boar and the bear is because in the Eastern world, Ursa Major was viewed as a boar. And he says literally that, just the way language works, that bear or boar got transferred over to bear at some point. But you have words like hyperborea or
Yeah.
borea, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Aurora borealis
Yeah.
and things like that. So I think that that's pretty interesting. So with Aries, it just reminds me of a torus field, basically, right? It's like energy emanating from the center, kind of like unfurling, sprouting. It's
Yeah.
almost like this fountain sort of dynamic or whatever. It just reminds me of like a seed kind of unfurling,
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah. The
right?
boar is the boar is associated with I forget the boar's name, but Freya actually rides a boar. She has I think she has two big cats that
Mm-hmm.
drive her chariot, but then she will also ride like I think bareback on a boar, and that is that in the mythological archetypes is the power of her husband, right? So like this is like the boar actually represents her brother Freyr, which she would also be her consort in certain circumstances, and which also has its explanation in the Bach saga as to why brother and sister are also father and mother, right? And so yeah, so the boar has the same kind of ferocity as the bear, that would be so the boar would be an aspect of what Vanir worshippers in Old Norse would be emulating on as one of their animal totems that would inspire their warriors as such, and that would be part of a drive that would come from basically making their women happy. They fight
Mm.
for their women, right? And thus the woman rides on the boar. It's their sex drive.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that is super primordial. That's fascinating.
Mm.
So outside of like like Norse mythology, like conventional Norse mythology, is there bear symbolism in the Bach saga? Have you heard anything about that?
The bear symbolism in the box saga. You know what? I can't quite. I'm not. I don't think I know. I don't think I've come across bear symbolism. What I do know is that most of our horned beasts. What they say is in the Bach saga is that when the Ragnarok came, right, and thus we had our axial tilt, the ice age came. Um, the Hyperboreans had to develop agriculture because they also were reseeding the race because white people we came later. Three primary white races seeded the rest of the white races, and that would be the Swedish people, the Finnish people, the Swedish people, and the Germanic people. I believe are the three. I'm sorry, no. It's the Russian people. Yeah, it's the Russian people, which many of the Finns are ancient Russians. They're very different now, but they were originally part of the very original Rus people because there was an original Rus and his wife who came out of the Hyperborea, and then they seeded um, uh, 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 them. They seeded the Asian white people, if you will, the Slavs,
Mm-hmm.
and then the Germanic people, and then the Norse people, Sweden, Norway, per se, right? And so then from there, everything kind of popped out, and so agriculture, they took that goat because apparently way back in paradise, the only horned beast was the goat, and so from the goat they did their breeding program, and then they eventually genetically got the breeding program to make cows and rams and um, elk, maybe no, I can't remember, but a great deal of the horned beasts that we know now, all kind of originally came from the goat. This primordial goat that was just part of that aspect of who we are, because we were all vegetarian. At least we might have
Right.
been vegan, but we were all vegetarian back then. But it was the paradise time, and
Yeah.
we
Right.
didn't need meat at all to be big and strong.
Right, right. So couple things. One, I think the goat connection with Bach Saga stuff is super fascinating because when you start decoding symbolism related to Capricorn, which is the sea goat, right? It's all northern, bro. It's so northern, it's insane.
Hmm.
And so Capricorn takes place at the beginning of winter, right? So the winter solstice. The winter solstice symbolically corresponds with the north, right? And so the summer solstice corresponds with the south. There's inversions and there's ways to look at it, just kind of like what we are talking about earlier in the exact opposite sort of way. But I think that the northern correspondence makes a lot of sense personally. And I think this is interesting as well because I did a presentation a couple years ago called The Lost Lore of Saturn. I talk about the northern correspondence with Saturn. Saturn has a huge, major northern correspondence that is kind of lost on a lot of people. And it's said that Saturn ruled the last golden age,
Right.
which maybe is during this paradise time or this primordial tradition, right? That's kind of how I interpret it personally. And then it's also really interesting to me that midnight, the time of midnight, has a northern correspondence. So if you're reading like old like texts and there's a reference to midnight, they may very well be referencing the north. And so as an example, the midnight sun may be a reference to the black sun, which I
Right.
perceive the black sun to be like a northern stationary sun symbolically. This is in opposition or in contrast to the sun that rises and sets and travels around a lot. The black sun is a stationary sun. It's an immutable sun. It's like it's right there with the world axis basically. And so, this midnight correspondence corresponding with the north is interesting because midnight is at the very top of the clock, right? It's not unlike north on a compass, basically, right? If the arrow points up, it's pointing to the north. Midnight, 12 o'clock is right there at the very top as well. And to me, this is fascinating as well because Saturn, as I said, there's a polar correspondence there. It also relates to time, right? So there's a whole Saturnian correspondence, Chronos, Father Time, all of these different types of things, right? Well, this is where the biggest holiday takes place, where we acknowledge time, at least in the Western world. New Year's. New Year's takes place during Capricorn season, and it's all based around midnight. This is when the ball drops, right, at midnight. And so that's kind of interesting to consider. Also, during this time of year is when people go to midnight mass, right, for Christmas. And so Christmas Eve is when the Catholics go to midnight mass, right, during Capricorn season. So all of these things to me, just it all feels very northern. And then the most sort of popular northern god, deity figure is Santa. Everybody knows Santa comes from the North Pole,
Mm.
right? And so
Right.
Capricorn season is his time as well. And so everything about Capricorn is all northern. I see that with Saturn. I see this with the different holidays that take place.
Yeah.
People put a tree inside their house. This is the world tree. When you put a
Mhm.
star on top of this tree, you're putting the North Star on top of the world tree, basically. And then all of this relates to the goat. So I see the goat as being very much like a
Yeah.
northern thing. And then also people say the goat relates to not the right hand path, but the left hand path. And as we're saying, the left hand, well, when it comes to the counterclockwise rotation, if you go counterclockwise around something, the temple or the totem is on the left hand side. So there is a polar sort of correspondence with the left hand as well, I would say.
Yeah.
So all these different things, it's just an amalgamation of all
Yeah.
this shit.
One of the my favorite videos that was done by Scott Carlson on his channel was about actually Santa and Norse mythology, where Santa is a Christian remake of Thor, and it makes perfect sense with many of the breakdowns with how it goes with the association with red, because Thor is supposed to have red hair. He drives a sleigh. Thor's on a chariot. It's being pulled by his goats, not the reindeer. But then the reindeer, perhaps you're getting some Finnish slash Sami influence on Santa coming from the reindeer, and Finland is where the Sami people are, thus the North Pole in that particular respect, right? I would trust the Finnish Santa over any other Santa. If you want to have fun being gaslit like this, go watch the classic comedy comedy film called Santa Slays with the
Hmm.
wrestler Bill Goldberg. He plays Santa Claus as the devil, right? Like there's
Hmm.
he takes like an old European kind of like thing about the devil and Santa Claus for this movie, and then you're just watching Santa Claus dressed like a fucking Viking running around acting like Thor. And it's just like nobody's making the connection because it's the 90s and Norse mythology isn't known by anybody outside of fucking Northern Europe and a handful of people that like Neil Gaiman. Right? So go gaslight yourself and go watch Santa Slays. It's hysterical. There's a scene where he stabs a Hasidic Jew with a menorah. And he
Okay, now I'll watch
nails
it.
him to the wall and kills him. It's it's so much fun.
You
It's a
should have started
hysterical.
with that, dude.
Yeah, yeah. but but with all seriousness though, uh, 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 so that's a Jew. Of course, like I said, Thor is largely like Jupiterian, right? But so this is kind of like a Saturnian aspect of it, and I think that probably all the gods are not one for one, although I think we know them by very predominant traits, right? Because I mean, like Odin is a war general, so Odin may be Mercury, but he might also be Mars if he's also a war general, right? So there's all these different little things. Also, Odin's very old, so Odin could be also Saturn because if your deity is represented by a very old man, you're talking about time, right? So that would also make him Saturnian, much like Vainamoinen in Finnish mythology is. Who is another representative of Gandalf, just like Odin, who is also very old. He is born old in the Kalevala, and the Vainamoinen mythology is the other name for the Bach saga, which thus gives it its relationship to the Finnish Kalevala.
Hmm.
So Vainamoinen is a bard, but he's also extremely Saturnian.
Gotcha, gotcha. One thing I'll just say real quick. I see Mercury, the planet Mercury, associated deities, Hermes, Thoth, things
Yeah.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
Mercury has a unique sort of role, right? In my opinion.
Mm.
So to be mercurial is to kind of have different looks, have different masks,
Yeah.
right? Mercury is known as being an androgynous figure, feminine and masculine. This idea of the divine androgyne corresponds with Mercury.
Hermes
You have
Aphrodite.
Yeah, you have the Gemini twins, right? This light and dark sort of duality with the twins.
Mm.
This sign is ruled by Mercury, right? So there's a lot going on there. So what I've decoded personally is that I see Mercury as having a very, very strong solar correspondence. There's a lot of solar symbolism baked into Mercury, in my opinion. There's a lot of lunar symbolism baked into Mercury as well. That can go on and on and on. There's a whole relationship between the moon and Mercury and lunar lunar sort of motifs and themes and stuff with Mercury as well. Mercury is related to Quicksilver. Silver's related to the moon. Kind of goes on and on and on. Even the horns of the Mercury glyph are kind of not unlike the crescent moon. But also, Mercury has a huge relationship with polar symbolism. So it's actually more of like a triune sort of dynamic, polar, lunar, and solar. You can talk about each thing at length as it corresponds with Mercury. So mercurial figures have this whole big spectrum basically that they're oftentimes related to, in my opinion. And a lot of messenger traveler gods are related to Mercury. And when you're traveling and things like that, you get a different look. You get to see different things and talk to different people. And so you're probably going to change along your journey and things like that. So
Mm.
that's one of the things I wanted to mention. But let's talk about the axial tilt sort of dynamic, pole shift sort of
Yes.
thing, and then I'd love to talk some of about some of what Ryan Eckerson, whatever his name is, the
Okay.
podcast that you sent me.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Totally. So, in my opinion, kind of getting into conspiracy theory and stuff, one of the things was pole shift, right? When is the next pole shift going to happen? When did the last pole shift happen? What happens during a pole shift, right? This axial tilt or whatever, or this idea that the magnetic poles flip and then it causes all sorts of destruction and chaos and earthquakes and who knows what else, right? It just makes me wonder. I tend to interpret things very symbolically. There's a lot of other people. I even see history symbolically. It's just like my lens. It's what I choose to kind of filter everything through. I get more value out of it like that because, in my opinion, history really, it seems as though it's almost all up for grabs, right? I don't know what real history is. I don't know what year we're living in. There's a lot of things that I'm unclear about, right? Even what's happening in today's world, I don't know what's going on, let alone before I was born, let alone 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. So, just letting you know that that's kind of my perspective on things. I try not be super anal with historical sort of stuff because at the end of the day, I just don't know if I'll ever really know. I'm not saying that you shouldn't pursue historical accuracy because of that. I'm just admitting kind of where I'm at personally with everything. So, when it comes to an axial shift or like a pole shift of some sort, it makes me wonder if the shift is actually in the perspective of man, and that's kind of the symbolism behind it. Is that it's actually a shift in mentality. It's a shift in dynamic in the hearts of man, right? And the way I perceive it is the real pole shift actually related to the fact that man shifted from a polar nature to a solar nature, and that this is the great shift that happened in mankind. And so we refer to it maybe as like an axial tilt or something along these lines. I don't know. And again, I already mentioned it earlier. I'm not sure exactly about the precession of the equinoxes as most people sort of understand it. I don't know if the pole star actually does change. I'm kind of up to either side. I'm open to sort of what people have to say, about all of that. So that's just what I wanted to mention sort of briefly about everything. Are we shifted or is that just a metaphor?
Well, I think because I am a very principled student of the Kybellion, and you can, and for anybody who wants to poo-poo the Kybellion, as such, it's just like read it. You can say
It's a good
whatever the
one.
hell you want about the publisher and the three initiates.
Right.
Read it. All right. So the all and the mind. When we were influenced to shift into the inversion because we all ended up on the black magic in some way, shape, or form, perhaps, just sympathetically. Um, our integrity gave a bad feedback to the creator, and the creator um, said, I have to, you're out of alignment. And to hold the integrity of the world together, I have to now shift. And this is a pain that you're forcing me to do because I made you for me. And this is what has to happen now because you're actually in control. I'm just having the experience as the all, right? And um so yeah, I'd say that we had a shift and then the universe reacted to our world.
Mm. Mm. Interesting.
This is magic. This is magic. That's how it works, right? Why did the world make the choices that it made in 2020 and has never gone back and has completely severed its continuity and things. People are waiting for Hollywood to stop making bad movies. It's just like, guess what? If good movies are to return, it ain't gonna be Hollywood. It's gonna be you if you want it to be because
Right.
we've
Right.
gone into a different kind of psychological shift.
Yeah, man. I can appreciate that. I can appreciate that perspective. And I think a lot of things actually work this way. Unbeknownst to most people, obviously. And I'll just give one such example. And I thought it was interesting actually that Robert Phoenix tweeted this question like sometime last year, and he's great. I love Robert,
Oh, of
and
course.
I had been contemplating the same thing, but he basically asked, you know, do the planets influence us, or do we influence the planets? You know, is it, you know, what's in our hearts and minds, and you know, how we act, is
Mhm.
that going to influence what happens out there? And we just have it completely inverted, where the modern sort of mindset is that these planets do their rotations and shifts and transits and everything else, and that affects what's happening here. What if it's the exact opposite? And I think this is worth chewing on, and I don't know if I'm doing it complete justice, but one of my favorite authors, Gwenon, mentioned him like already 3 times today. He proposes this as well. He says that that's an inversion. He says that this is a modern inversion, and there's so many inversions. Everything in today's world is like a copy, or is an inversion or a corruption or a distortion of something that came before it. So everything today is like a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, right? We know
Mhm.
what that happens, what that looks
Yeah.
like, right? If you're like, you know, doing that and you have a copy machine, the original is going to look pristine and clear. You know, the 100th copy is going to look
Right.
distorted and all of that.
Yeah.
And so I think everything is kind of like that in today's world, and that perhaps ancient peoples had the exact opposite opinion about the influence dynamic of we are influencing what's happening out there versus it happening to us. And most people today have a sort of mentality, like a victim mindset. Everything's just happening to them, right?
Right. Right.
In the polar tradition, in primordial times, I think that there was a lot going on where it was an inward outward sort of thing.
Yeah.
They sort of understood the power of your thoughts, your sort of divinity, all of these different types of things. So they worked from the center and it worked outward, not the exact opposite sort of way.
I have two bits for you. Uh, the first bit I'm gonna say, I'm gonna give a shout out to Slick Dissident. I've been keeping an eye on the chat. Chat's been popping. I got 14 viewers right now, and Slick made the point of maybe our hearts were once less off center. And this made me think of one of the most transformative revelations, right? Was when the Mandela effect was first being realized. I'm a
Yeah.
Mandela affected person. Whether we've been gaslit by some sort of Watiko virus, or literally time and space have retro actively changed or something like that. I am a person who grew up knowing a world where the heart was off center, right? Put your hand over your heart. It's always over here. You know, the heart was way more over here in textbooks that you can go look at now, and they're not there in the textbooks now. If your Mandela effect is the way your memory works, right? You know, now it leans this way a little bit because of its its shape as a chestahedron, but it's dead center of the fucking chest. You know, and I'm sitting there like with all the new agers listening to Eastern medicine. Oh, let's meditate and get to heart center, heart center, heart center. Well, maybe those of us meditating to get to heart center caused the breaking of the Mandela effect to bring our hearts back into alignment. Because when I
Mm,
saw that, I had uh, a shiver run through my whole body, and it was a good shiver. It was feeling
mm,
physiologically aligned. My nervous system was reacting extraordinarily positively to it. It
mm,
felt good, and I've felt amazing ever since. Right. So um so that magic, the way you're saying it, if we go with trying to get a cohesive, less arguable flat Earth model, and we look at our sky clock, um, uh, centrality still works. You see, all these sky clocks on the flat Earth have each little planet going on its own little fucking course, and that pissed me off. Excuse me, How do you explain retrograde motion? And all these flat earthers would look at me like I'm the devil. And then I fucking figured it out. Wait, it's not a geocentrism. It's just the earth is down here, the sun and the moon are doing their thing, and then everything is following the sun above us, and that's what causes the retrograde motion because they're equally orbiting the sun and we're down here. So all those planets are moving, and thus you'll eventually get the retrograde motion when the sun is on the other side of the world. So if the Earth is flat, that's the explanation for retrograde motion.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
thus, if
No,
the sun
I think
is
that the planets
responsible,
are following the sun.
yeah, and so if the sun's responsible for the axial tilt on the globe Earth model, then that also stands to reason.
You know, it's a whole can of worms. I'm not sure if you're aware. I got invited to the Flat Earth to speak at the last Flat Earth conference,
Mm-hmm.
and it actually did not happen because a hurricane came through, and it was the timing was wild,
Mm.
and so didn't get a chance to talk about what I wanted to talk about. I was prepped and ready to go and everything else, but the hurricane, really thwarted everyone's plans, right? So I've been keeping up with that side of things for a while. I'm not an expert by any means. As I was just saying, I'm more symbolically minded person. There's people who could speak at this or about this much better than I can, right? But there's been a whole entire thing recently about a 24-hour sun in Antarctica, right? I don't know if you've been keeping up with any of that kind of stuff, but
Yeah, the
um,
24-hour sun in Antarctica, which I'm assuming that's a 24-hour sun in the southern summer, right?
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So this was a whole entire thing. I personally think that there's a lot of hoaxy, psyopy things going on right now with some of the key characters that are part of all of that. There's all sorts of things happening. I think it's really interesting that there's always this emphasis on the sun, and to me, I just think that there's something going on with that as well. Always looking towards the sun. I think the sun is interesting. I give a certain amount of you know high respect to the sun for sure. Obviously, how could you not? But I think that sometimes it's a misdirection, right? To always be focused on the sun.
Mm.
But I will say, with some people that I still continue to follow from that community, it's really, really interesting. This idea um, that there's one singular sun and that all the planets revolve around it, and the same sun that I see is the same sun that you see.
Mm.
I'm open to the possibility that there is something going on. I'll just say it, I don't think we know what's going on.
Mm.
And so I don't think we quite know what's going on. But there a number of people have basically done the work and concluded that some people in South America, the furthest south you can possibly go, that the sunrise that they see does not match the sunrise angle that some other people see down there.
Mm.
And so if it's all the same sun,
Mm.
something's amiss. There's something we're not quite understanding. Some people have proposed, perhaps, that we all have a unique relationship with the sun. And there's kind of several things to kind of talk about with that. But I'm just going to put that out there for whatever it's worth, that there are still mysteries with the sun that I don't know we quite understand basically.
I have an idea that I got from watching like a little science demonstration with a mirror and lasers. And okay, so if you have a concave mirror, right? Like so when I'm talking about this, we're imagining the firmament, right? So let's just say we got a firmament. We got some sort of light refracting like substrate in the sky, right? The sun is coming from that. And what's happening is that there may be a this kind of like 1,000 points of light kind of situation when
Mm,
you bounce laser points off of the dome. When it's shaped like this, they reflect back in convergence, and it's extra bright at the convergence point of all the laser lines. That's the
Mm-hmm.
sun, is a convergence of 1,000 points of light
Mm.
off of the dome from another source, which on a flat Earth model, it would be coming out of Mount Meru.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. Yeah, yeah. I've heard not exactly the same thing, but kind of similar sorts of ideas, you know. So it's kind of all up for grabs still, in my opinion, with that. The thing I'll say, it does seem as though we are stationary, the Earth is not moving, but what is happening above is moving, and
Mhm.
do we understand exactly the phenomenon of how it actually like occurs and all that kind of stuff? That I'm not so sure about.
Mm.
So to really be hyper focused on the sun and say that it dictates what we live on, I don't think is actually correct, personally.
Mm. Mm.
Which is what the whole thing about the Antarctica final experiment was all about, the last experiment or whatever it was called. They're
Mm.
trying to say that this sun, if we see the sun, then the flat earth model's done. And in my opinion, it's like we're talking about two different things. We're talking about what's happening up there, all these luminaries, and then we're talking about what's happening here. And so that's kind of the switcheroo sort of
Right. Right.
propaganda angle, in my opinion,
True.
people
But to
kind
be
of.
fair, it is so much even for a pretty damn intelligent person to swallow when they're not ready to like jump through the looking glass, right? Um because the argument for the flat earth is asking you to accept so many effing things that it's an absurdity unless you've been a conspiracy theorist about space and geophysics and all that stuff for a very, very, very long time, right? And so like this is why like I don't really, uh, uh, I'm I just want to play with all the models. Is
Sure.
honestly where I'm at because, um, I'm not interested in alienating myself from round earth people, right? Like I got a tremendous amount of love and respect for Thomas Sheridan, for instance, who I'd love to have on the channel. He's interested, right? So Thomas is the biggest like anti flat earth troll that I know, who I still love and respect, and I understand it because at the very least, you have to think about when you're championing an idea that's so many leagues removed from the baseline of consciousness that you have to really look in the mirror and ask, am I making myself look foolish? Right. So that's why you have to have a deeper conversation, with the grace. I couldn't fucking care for flat earthers because so many of them were just fucking rude. Rude,
Oh yeah, yeah,
nasty
totally.
fucking people.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah,
Because
exactly.
snob. It's like you're being a fucking snob about this. You realize you haven't fucking established that you're not the backwaters guy right now. You're not necessarily got the best standing, even if your life is hunky dory with a good house. Right? You can still be that level of foolish just because you do well because you're maybe a mechanic on your day job or whatever the heck you're doing with yourself, right? Because there's more important things that we don't need to, that I feel not to lose face over. So I have these conversations when I know who my company is. I know that you are someone who takes
Right.
flat earth seriously, can take round earth seriously, because we
Hmm.
care about just knowing what's right, getting it right. That's what we care about.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm the same way, and I really think that being sort of Earth shaped agnostic and being like I don't know, but it's
Yeah,
probably
exactly.
not
We're
what we've been
agnostic this
taught
way, right?
is probably like the best sort of approach with everything. You
Right,
know.
right, exactly, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I totally understand. And I don't. I'm not the type of person that's trying to convert anybody in my day
Yeah,
to day, or in person. Oh no, dude, you got to look into this or look into that. To me, it's like people are
yeah,
gonna either
yeah.
find it if they're interested. If not,
Yeah.
I don't really care.
I just like if I think I have a cohesive explanation, like explanation that an anomaly is a real anomaly, I'll bring that up. I won't even say anything about flat Earth. I got a hysterical way in which I deal with it because there's always somebody who asks me the follow up questions when I bring that up, because they're basically trying to make me say I'm supporting a flat Earth theory, and I just never give them that. I'm just like, I don't know. Look at this anomaly or whatever. Right? I'll make them call me a flat earther, and then see how I want to respond to that.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I'm not going to undignify myself by falling into the trap of their idea of the flat Earth and their idea of my intelligence. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. I totally understand, man.
Yeah, yeah. And also I gotta say hi, Michelle. Your wife is here in the
Oh,
chat.
hey. Hey,
Yep.
baby.
Yep, she's been around for a hot minute, but
Nice.
I've been circling the flow state with you. We got a lot of good people in here. Peaceful Penguin is here. I don't know if you know how many of your guys and my guys are Thelonious Terp, Lucy Rose Up. These are most of these people I know. There's like a lot of wrenches tonight.
Right on.
Sanico is here. He's been an old fan of mine for forever. Vicky S, and Ronin Experience. My
Awesome.
Cherie is here. Hi, my Cherie. It's been
Right
a
on.
long time. I'm glad you came around. Um, and Awaken Your Mind was here earlier. He may still be listening. That's my buddy Derek. I don't know if you ever Derek likes to interview a lot of people. He probably would interview you. He's got a very good channel. He's in network with Mark Passio and with Seth Gasposa. He's a good friend.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay. So let's keep going. Let's keep going. I think there was something more that you had there, right? I think we were still in the middle of your explanation of a thing.
Um, I mean, we can switch gears for sure. I wanted to touch on the pole shift thing. I think we kind of went on some tangents, which is what this is all about
Okay,
too.
yeah, so
So
let's get back to pole shift.
no, no, no. If you want as well, because you sent me that podcast, the Ryan Eckerson sort of work or whatever, and I did have some opinions about that. If you wanted to hear it, but it's classic Mario Garza sort of stuff with, you know, if you want to just lay the groundwork on what this guy's putting forth, I think that actually would be a good place to start, and then I can kind of comment on what I took away from it, and maybe what I see he could do to fill in some of the gaps in his research, from my opinion.
Oh, okay. We're talking about from that Nordic mythology podcast, Eric's Eckerson, right? We're talking about that one. You wanted to go
Y-
there, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. So, trying to remember the name off the top of my head because, like, I wasn't even done watching it when I sent you the link, so that's how fresh this whole thing is in my mind. So this
Sure.
guy
Yeah,
is
yeah. No,
a
no worries.
yeah. So this guy is a scholar that went on a mainstream Norse mythology podcast that's got some very good, very bright people, and I gotta go. I gotta look at my list and pull it up while I'm talking here just to get the names straight. At any rate, he went and he did a bunch of study and made a bunch of important contextual correlations that were academically founded for him to see and decode our traditional northern sky as we know it with Ursa Major and Minor and Gemini and Draco and Orion and such. Um, and found out how they tell different key stories in Norse mythology. And he uses a lot of citation from, I think, Snorri Sturluson in Gylfaginning, I think he mentions the most, where there's uh, kind of like a overlooked or mistranslated term in a description of a thing where it makes celestial references, very particular celestial references with words such as these things are in the heavens or written in the heavens or something along those lines. And so he builds this argument for why his entire thesis of his presentation holds evidence to its merit. And then he goes off and, through his academic point of view, makes all the correlations that are in Scott and Billy Joe's Exposing Abraham book. as well as a few that I was intuiting on my own. Um, and a number of things that I wouldn't have made the particular correlations either, just because of different things um, Gemini. Gemini is has been known to be the eyes of Thiazi from Norse mythology, where Odin has to defeat this Jotun king, and then he takes his eyes and puts them in the heavens so he can see
Mm,
the whole world as such. But because Gemini is right next to Orion, and Orion goes like this, that's Thor on his chariot, and Gemini are the goats that pull his chariot, right? And the way the heavens move, corresponds with that, with those goats in front of him and moving in that proper direction. Um, and so he goes on with a number of these particular things. Was that a good enough sum up for you, or were you hoping more more out of me?
oh no.
Vikings in Space with Ryan Eckerson is the name of it. I went to his academia page to message him. I shot him a message. I will hopefully I will hear a response, because honestly, he was so impressed. I also want to interview him and have a similar conversation with him as I am with you right now.
Excellent. Right on. Yeah. No. I definitely wanted to get around to it. So you sent it to me maybe a couple days ago or something, and
Right.
I checked it out once. I wrote down some notes, and then I actually listened to it a second time, just to make sure I kind of grokked everything appropriately.
Mm.
And he's coming from academia, right? And so I think that this is, in a way, potentially limiting for him. And
Mm-hmm.
so I
Mm-hmm.
thought there was a lot of interesting things that he brought to the table. But the big thing I think he's missing, this is just me armchair sort of symbolic analysis for what it's worth.
Mm.
But we're talking about Norse mythology. And so I think that the northern aspect, I think, is something that he maybe needs to do a little bit more sort of research on personally. And I haven't seen all of his stuff, by the way. I only saw what you sent me.
Right.
And
I,
so,
I I don't know anything else either. Right. I'm a baby on
right. And
this.
so, it's almost like we're having a conversation, and probably most people have not seen the talk that we're talking about, that
Yeah,
we're,
it's a very new episode. I'll link
yeah.
it in the chat room.
But I really think it's one of these things where he would benefit so much from looking into the world axis. He really would. Because of this northern correspondence with the world axis,
Mm-hmm.
that there's a lot of things that he's basically, in my opinion, like the big sort of overarching maybe criticism that I have is that he's looking at it through a modern heliocentric lens. And
Mm-hmm.
so he's not thinking like a northerner. He's not thinking like someone who believes that the earth is stationary, right? He's unaware of this great shift from polar to solar symbolism, right? And
Mm.
so once you become aware of these dynamics, these myths take on sort of a new level of understanding, in my opinion. And so, as I said earlier, where I'm really coming at with things these days is that all of these myths that I see all over the sky, I'm blown away at how many of them have a polar correspondence. And I don't think that this is me reaching, and I don't think that I'm misinterpreting the data or anything like that. It's basically what Guanon and others have said is polar symbolism is truly primordial. Solar symbolism is more modern, basically. And so he's putting a lot of emphasis on the Pleiades, right? And
Mm.
he's unaware that there was this symbolic transfer from Ursa Major to the Pleiades, when people became more solar. So if you're unaware of that dynamic, so again, because Ursa Major is so close to the North Star, and so close to Ursa Minor, that there is just because of that close proximity, Ursa Major has a lot of symbolism connected to it that relate directly to the northern sky, to the North Star, right? So this stairway to heaven dynamic. When he's referring to this hall, this juggler with 7 knives that's juggling in this hall. That's part of the talk. That's part of what he kind of brought forward. He's saying, as an example, the seven knives are the Pleiades. It makes way more sense that the seven knives would be Ursa Major or Minor, and that this hall is the symbolic world axis that I'm referring to. Also, like Weird's Well, this being sort of a symbolic center in the heavens, it makes way more sense that there's a northern polar correspondence with
Who's
that.
the juggler? Who's the juggler if the juggled is Ursa Major or Minor?
Well, I mean, it's basically, I mean, it's all, my opinion is that all of the myths sort of go back there. So any figure, any king, any queen, any animal, any sort of storyline, it's all sort of found there, in my opinion, that basically the way I perceive it is that there is a real hierarchy in the heavens, and that the northern sky is at the top of the hierarchy,
Mm.
and that everything, because it emanated from there, that when we're referring to the origin of things, that's where things go back to, basically. So as an example, like a wheel, right? So if you have a wheel, you have the external part of the wheel, you have the middle of the wheel, you have the spokes emanating from the center. Where did the all of the wheel symbolism, the circumference of the wheel, the outside of the wheel, cannot function or exist without that center. That center is like the primordial unifying aspect of the wheel, right? It's where the reconciliation of opposites occurs. It's kind of like the symbolic seed. It's not unlike like the growth rings of a tree, right? So everybody knows that the growth rings start from the center and then emanate outward. So even, the rings on the outside of the tree, where did they come from? They came from the center, right? Or ripples in a pond. You throw a rock in a body of water, all of the ripples emanate sort of from the center. My claim is that the same thing happened in the heavens. The same way I described it on Earth, man migrating from the north.
Mm.
I think the same exact thing happened in the heavens. Basically, it all rippled out
Yeah.
symbolically from the northern sky. So these myths, they're not just. I think that they are referencing these different cycles, things rising over the horizon, setting over the horizon. There are these different stories that play out, just with the natural cycle of things, right? But there's a metaphysical principle behind these stories as well. That basically symbolism at its core, it's a way for people to pass down metaphysical truths. That is the best way to convey this type of information is you do it symbolically. And so thinking about things from a heliocentric perspective, if you're putting everything that the sun is the center of all things, and in your mind your earth is also spinning around the sun, and you're on a ball that's also spinning,
Mm.
and there's no universal up. That's one of the things that comes with the globe earth model, is
Mm.
someone at the equator and someone in South America and someone in North America. Up is arbitrary. They all have different ups, basically.
Right. Right.
This
Right.
was not the case, in my understanding, during primordial paradise times.
Yeah.
It was like of supreme importance that there was a universal up and a universal down. And the idea, from what I gather, is that energy basically flowed, not unlike a river or a stream or like rain, from the heavens downward, basically. And that the hierarchy was that things that are upward are more sort of heavenly, etheric,
Mm.
all these different types of things. There's a reason why trees grow upward. Obviously, there's the relationship with the sun,
Yeah.
but symbolically, it's almost like every tree is like a bridge sort of to the
Yeah.
heavens.
Well, they
And
grow downwards too. They practically have to have roots as deep as their
right.
height, right?
Hmm.
Here's another one. Here's something you're going to appreciate from Bach Saga correspondence because in the in the world of Udma, what would happen is every year, which I think that would start now with the in the Aries time. The king and the queen would make a decision. They would make a decision, and they would get sulfur, and they called the sulfur schwa, and they would um, get a pinwheel that they would light on fire with the schwa. This was the swastika. And if they spun the swastika clockwise, it meant increase life. If they spun it counterclockwise, it meant increase knowledge. And then this made me think of correspondences where high intelligent populations have low birth rates, right? This was the premise in the reverse for the movie Idiocracy. You
Right.
watch the
Yeah.
beginning of the movie, the
Yeah.
highly intelligent couple die never having children because they couldn't rationalize making life. While the dumbass Hicks didn't care. They were just making babies, making babies, making babies without the ability to teach any of them anything. Right. And then this happened over generations, and the overall IQ of the human race plummeted by the time the movie gets out of its introduction. Right. So uh, uh, I think that we've kind of understood that. Right. And I think that with the counterclockwise swastika idea, we may, it's why we kind of fear it with what Hitler did, with what the Nazis did, because eugenics programs, right? They were highly technologically advanced. Right, they went through, and they got into the esoteric sciences and everything else, and but also they, especially with warfare and stuff, fucked over their population.
Right. Right.
Oh, and by the way, we call the swastika in the north the Philfot, is its name in amongst Europe. You'll see that on ancient European shields. It's got a very short um, hook that comes out, but it's a cross like that, and then it hooks. Well, it hooks like this.
Right. Right. Yeah, I have seen that actually.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, as an example too, Ursa Major, there's a whole blade connection with Ursa Major. And so it's been interpreted in so many different ways. It literally is like you could have an exhaustive list of all of the correspondences, basically. And so it's been interpreted as a blade or a knife. It's been interpreted as a scythe. Notice how a scythe kind of looks like the number seven. I've been putting this out for a little while now, but I
Mhm.
see it that I wonder at least if we get the number seven from Ursa Major. It looks exactly like a seven. It has seven stars. The
Mhm.
swastika also has the four arms that go around the central axis. They all
Mhm.
kind of look like the number seven.
Mm.
And so when I see the correspondence of the seven knives being the Pleiades, I see more correspondences personally with Ursa Major. Even the fact that there's a special blade. It's a Middle Eastern blade, and it has like a divot in it. It has like a little arc inside of it. And it's been said that literally this blade was designed to look like Ursa Major, basically. And
Okay.
sometimes it's even referred to as the Iron of Set. And Set has a relationship with Ursa Major as
Mm.
well.
Okay. Okay.
Esoterically, it's been said that Set hides behind Ursa Major, that Ursa Major, in some ways, some contexts,
Mm.
it looks like that's the mother, and that it's hiding behind these seven stars. And even Set has a relationship with Sept, as in like septenary, like number seven, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Septentrio being like of the north, which he mentions in his presentation as well. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying that his correspondences are necessarily incorrect. All I'm saying is that I think that there's another layer
Yeah.
to it, and I think that the polar northern influence is something that he would get. It would blow his mind probably if he started
Yeah.
looking into that kind of
And
stuff.
and the scythe is associated because it's like the harvest and things like it is Kronos again. We are talking about
Hmm.
Saturn in that respect. I also have kind of a theory. So Odin is a psychopomp, as we know, right? He's highly involved with the ferrying of the dead. Now, one of Odin's famous uh, names is Grimnir. And I'm like, Grimnir, right? Grimness, right? Grim Reaper, right? And the scythe is a big pole arm, then it's just got the hook over there. And Odin, like Thor, has a relationship to bears. People think of it more with Thor because he's the big burly guy like a bear, right? But the Berserker is very associated with Odin, especially because Fenris is Odin's bane. And so I believe that sometimes Ursa Major or perhaps Ursa Minor is Fenris, and Ursa Major would be uh, or it's Ursa Major because he's bigger than Ursa Minor, and Ursa Minor is Odin because then he could be big enough to possibly swallow him. Um, and I think Ursa Major may be associated with Tyr as well because Ursa Minor could be Fenris, and then Ursa Major has him on the leash, and then that leash is his tail connected to the pole star. So that's Tyr symbolism. I think about that a lot because Tyr is an important deity to me in my path. Um,
Yeah,
and
man. I mean,
so,
even the rune
yeah.
that's associated with Tyr, that vertical line with the arrow, right?
Hmm.
To me, that's the world axis. And from what I know, northern Norse mythology and like the runes, not my area of expertise,
Right.
but from people I've talked to and what I've read,
Yeah.
is that Isa, the just a straight vertical line,
Hmm.
is emblematic of the world axis. That it
Yeah.
actually, that's what it really comes back down to, is that it's that original pole, that original point of pivot for all things. And so that is the sort of original sort of essence of all of the runes, because they're all made out of just straight lines
Yeah.
basically. So the
If you,
simplest one, Isa, is literally a reference to the world axis, the axis mundi. And then I know the Box Saga people like to say too that the letter I, the modern letter I with the dot on top of it, is the world axis with the pole star on
yes,
top, right?
yes, that's right, that's right. Now get this: the number seven, if you mirror it, it looks like the rune Lagus, which is the letter L, which is looks like our normal letter L. If you take that and you flip that upside down,
Yeah.
Lagus. Now, in the discipline of the path of the runes, which is a little bit like the path of the tarot, it's a little bit of a kind of like an energetic version of the hero's journey. In the north position is the Tiwaj rune. In the south position, because Laguz comes uh, uh, four letters later, is Laguz. So Laguz represents the lowest point. It's the abyss. It's the depths of the deep ocean or the deep lakes, right? Versus the heights of the sky, right? And so Laguz is like I look at Laguz, I see it as a fishing line. The little pole on top is the fisherman's fishing pole, and then he's got a huge line going down the bottom of the abyss to extract deep knowledge, and that's Laguz to me. And then you keep yourself um, connected to the real world by having your alignment with Tiwaz. So that way you don't fall into the depths, but then also Laguz can keep you anchored to the world so you don't fly up
Mm,
into the heavens, right? It's the idea
mm.
you're staying grounded, but also you can free your mind into the higher things too. So you can go to the heights and go to the depths, and you can always come back to center and integrate.
Nice, man. I like it. Yeah, I got to get back into the runes at some point because I do appreciate the symbolism and just
Mm-hmm.
kind of everything else. And as a system too, I think there's something very honest about it. There's something very honest and like straightforward. I think. And I think even with the tarot, as much as I love the tarot, I think there's almost like there's more of a veil with it, and things can be a little bit more cryptic and vague and what have you.
Mm.
One of the things I just want to mention, just using bear symbolism as kind of a way to explain a bit too, where I think that this researcher, the Ryan guy, what kind of like situation he's in. I started reading a book a while ago. I put it down, but I need to revisit it about the bear and bear symbolism and bear mythology and bear history and everything about the bear, right? Of course, me being me, I have to look into bear symbolism now and figure out what's going on there. And what I picked up from what I've read is that this guy, um, he's an academic. He's been wanting to publish his work on bear symbolism for years, for like decades. But what he found was that there was a lot of tension with his perspective on bear symbolism. And so what he said is that basically there is a rift in academia between the old guard sort of and the new guard. And he said that the old guard did not want him to publish information about there being bear cults and that the bear being this central totem for like northern peoples and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yes.
everything in his research was pointing him in that direction. He was saying that no, the bear was the animal. It was the totem animal. They saw the bear as a warrior, as a shaman, and I can't remember the other one, but they had these different ways of looking at the bear. That there was basically like it was just an all-encompassing sort of thing, what the bear sort of could represent to these different peoples and everything else, right? I think a king. The bear was like a king, a warrior, and a shaman, like all in one, basically.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so he did all this research and dug into all of these different really ancient bear caves where there's like clear altars to bears basically from
Hmm.
his research and what other people have said, and there's like bones strategically placed and all of these different things, including the names of these old northern European kings going back basically to the bear, right? Even King Arthur. Arthur goes back to bear. I'm pretty convinced of that. He mentions
You
that
know,
as
I
well.
was I was actually going to bring up there's some stuff that I would have to spend a little bit more time making sure I can uh, uh, cover it all in my own words, right? But that there is a deep mythos with the bear and the berserker
Yeah.
in like if this is like King Arthur is like a berserker who has mastered that level of control, kind of like the way you see Amleth, who's the hybrid Ulfidnar berserker. So he's got an incredible amount of control of his bear rage, but yet has almost full effect of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot that that can be tapped into in the correspondences with the mystery school that I'm in with Temple of the White Dragon. One of the segments on the Black Earth Productions channel for the school is the legend of Arthur in the
Mm-hmm.
Magi Grail Shaman series, and uh, the first or second segment on Arthur gets into the bear warrior shaman of that noble bloodline uh, as it exists. Right, Arthur is a bit of a history and mythology kind of mixed together. Right.
Yeah, 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 exactly. So Arthur, R, Arctic, Arctos, and so there's a lot of things going on there.
Yeah.
Even Artemis going back to being a bear goddess, he gets into all of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so he's saying that the bear was of supreme importance. Ursa Major was of supreme importance. The bear was for these people, these northern peoples, that was it. There was no other animal. They called it the glory of the forest. There's all this beautiful stuff that he talks about the bear and how it relates to humanity as well, and how there are several animals that people have closely linked to humans, the bear being one of those, very very strong sort of connections with how
Right.
it looks and sort of how it like operates in the world and things like that, right?
Yeah, the fact that it can be semi bipedal for a
Yeah,
period of time.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of these people who had a reverence for the bear, they would always show the bear upright actually a lot of times, right?
Hmm.
Which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
And so anyways, I'm on this bear weave and I'm reading this book and he's saying that he got pushback every single time he wanted to publish this stuff. And eventually in the book he says that what happened over time is that the church started putting out anti-bear propaganda essentially.
Yeah.
The bear is slow and lumbering, and why would you worship the bear? And the bear
Yeah.
is primordial. What you should worship is the lion, the solar lion, right? More so
Right.
related to Christ and things like
And
that,
the
right?
demiurge.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so they
I'm a
had this
Leo, so I don't
whole
got a problem with lion worship. I mean, I'm not a Leo, but I got so much shit in Leo that I
right.
might as well be pretending I'm a Leo.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, the church had this active campaign to eradicate bear worship that took place over hundreds of years.
Yeah,
It got replaced with the solar lion. This is kind of like a micro of like a macro, basically. And so I bring this up because of this researcher that you sent me the link to listen to his work on that
yep,
podcast.
yep,
And operating in academia is only going to get you so far, and you
yep.
have to operate within certain confines, and you can't sort of break out of that. And so that's the only thing I'll say is that I think that he's working within this sort of parameter,
Sure, yeah.
and you have to color within the lines if you want to have a career and if you want to have grants and if you want to publish work, at these
Mhm.
university presses and all of that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
stuff.
Well, I think yeah, and I think depending on how things want to develop, because I've heard a few people that are on the academic kick that I think are doing a good justice for things in different fields. Ugh, I can't remember the name right now. There's this one guy. I mean, well, for one thing, Tom Rousel, Survive the Jive. He's awesome, and he has a lot of leeway to expand on those things. I mean, because he takes a lot of slack as it is for being much more on the conservative and Chad side of arguments half the time. And there's one or two other people that he has had these conversations with that did a lot of really good work on a handful of things like like the traditional Northern European soul complex and stuff like that, and getting more into the spiritual weeds about it. Yeah, no, there's been a big suppression on the bear in that manner, and I find it, I found it funny over a certain period of time because growing up in the 90s, early 2000s, like a lot of people, I watched things like Comedy Central and the
Mm-hmm.
Colbert Report. Stephen Colbert is a Catholic, and Stephen Colbert liked to do weekly segments about bear warnings, right? And like
Mm.
he had jokes of anti-bear propaganda that were cute and funny. He'd find a funny but also kind of serious, like a bear was in somebody's backyard in the suburbs or whatever. Watch out for bears, right? This was his gag. And then when all the giga chads got drawn up out of the populist movement in conservatism, Beartaria comes up. And this is a war on all sorts of people like Stephen Colbert. And it's just like the people that took on that bear mantle were, kind of this revenge of the bear in a really interesting kind of way, right? So the bear is, I mean, everything's making a hardcore comeback. This emerging generation is so beautifully unlike what I grew up in. It feels just so comfortable. It feels so as just one of the few gems in the horrid things that can be happening across the board with other people that don't want to find the depths of who they are, right?
Mm-hmm. Right, right. Yeah. Interesting, man. Yeah. Even something as simple as the teddy bear, he even talks about, and how the teddy bear is this cute, cuddly little bear. And I know there's a whole history there with like Theodore Roosevelt, I'm pretty sure, and things like that. But
Hmm.
just the fact that the bear in today's world is viewed like that, but in actuality, go around a bear and it's like, it's nothing like that. That's a, it's a stereotype sort of, it's not an accurate sort of version of what the bear actually is, and it's far from how ancient people saw the bear, basically, right? So anyway, so for what it's worth, I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was
Hmm.
that was quite excellent. Hail the Bears of the North. um yeah, yeah. So we've been going about 2 hours and 15 minutes. I feel like we've had a tremendous covering of everything that I think, like, yeah, we covered the bases in droves. This is fantastic. I'm not sure I have too much that I could think to add tonight on this subject. I'm trying to remember if I'm forgetting something that was pressing a few minutes ago or something. I think I covered every little thing I wanted to bring up to ask you or for you to chew the fat on.
Yeah, yeah, man. No, this is awesome.
Yeah,
Same here. I
yeah,
think I covered a lot of what I wanted to get off my chest. Maybe the one other thing I'll just throw out there that I'm really interested in now is Ursa Major also being the jaw, and the jawbone specifically of
okay,
a donkey, but I think also related to the jawbone of the wolf. And that's another thing that Ryan Eckerson mentions is the
yes,
jaw of the wolf. And when you look at the jawbone of a donkey, which there's, I think it's Samson uses the jawbone of a donkey to
right,
like annihilate all these people in the Bible.
hmm,
When you look at the jawbone of a donkey or of a wolf and like a bunch of other animals, it kind of looks like a seven. It kind of looks like Ursa Major, in my opinion. So when I picked
hmm,
up that first correspondence of Ursa Major being a jawbone of a donkey, I'm like, oh shit, that's fascinating. And
yeah,
then seeing that other animals have a very similar jawbone and it kind of looks like the seven,
yeah,
and there's multiple myths that basically reference the jawbone of animals.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
just
yeah,
another thing that I'm thinking that like could potentially be a correspondence there. The same
yeah,
way Ursa Major has also been called the thigh of the bull, and
hmm,
there's like thigh symbolism associated with it, and lots of bull symbolism associated with the northern sky as well. So
yeah,
that's what I'm saying. It goes on and on and on and on.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm inclined to think a lot of the myths around the heavens actually have this sort of potent origin story in one specific location.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
But
but anyway,
before Yaldabaoth came in and corrupted whatever the original Hebrew paganism was in comparative mythology, you start to see and realize that a great deal of the prophets and stuff of the Old Testament, that's just they were the heroes. They didn't have gods, they had heroes. The Finns were the same way. They had a handful of gods, but then there were a lot of heroes. Lemminkainen was not a god, he was a hero, right? Lemminkainen is like Thor, and Samson is also like Thor. In
mm,
fact, in fact, you know, Thor, Sif, his wife, Loki cuts off his hair, and it's a big deal, and everybody wants to kick Loki's ass. Samson loses his strength because they cut his hair off when he is captured, right?
mm-hmm,
It,
mm-hmm.
so you find these things all over the place. Job and Cetus is a thing, right? So whatever this pre demiurgic pre, you know, people of the book, the people of the, when we went into mythology being a literalism, and all this stuff, um, like whatever that is. For one thing, I see it as the redemption of the Jewish people, to find that, to get them back to their original, and for our personal purposes to find a purer good out of these mythologies, instead of always running into what's in the literary that denigrates mankind by taking so many things literally, right? Which that can get into the confusions happening with the students of Lady Babylon, with what they think they're hearing about the Book of Genesis being about Uranus and Gaia, right, and other things that are kind of going off of the threads of Dr. Hillman and stuff. So these things are really, really important to me on a heart soul level. So glad that you brought that up. I'd
Right on,
love
man.
to I'd love to talk with you again, man, especially if you want to get back into the runes. If you can't find anybody better than me, I would love to talk. Like, I meditate on various runes every day. I do my readings every week with Greyhorn Pagans
Right.
podcast. I am, I've got them tattooed on me. So, I mean, we can do a thing. We can do a
Beautiful,
thing
man.
on the
Yeah,
runes
yeah.
for sure.
For sure. No, we'll continue the conversation in whatever sort of manner or topic sort of makes sense. But yeah, thanks for the invite. And we'll
I
we'll
showed
we'll
you the
do it
wrong
again.
scroll.
And I had a good time. There you go.
Yes, thank you. All right, guys in the chat, thank you so much. You've been really lit. You had so much to say that I couldn't respond to any of it because of the depth of what was going on with Mario and I. I'm honored that you came through. You lit up the chat and did a good thing for the channel as such. I love you all. I will see you guys as soon as I find the presence of time to hit up the next chapter in the box saga as I am covering it. And I will catch you guys later. And I am going to take us out in 3, 2, 1.